Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm your host, Sam Chase, and with us this evening is Town Manager Paul Cohen. Welcome, Paul. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
And the reason we've got Mr. Cohen on the show this evening is to tell us about the special town meeting that we're going to have on the 24th of February. And before we get into that discussion as to what's on the warrant and why we're doing it, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the difference between a special town meeting and a regular town meeting.
Under the Town of Chelmsford Charter, basically the fall and spring annual town meetings are on specified dates per the charter. The spring annual town meeting is always the fourth Monday in April, and the fall annual town meeting is always the third Monday in October. Aside from that, the select board can call additional town meetings, as we call special town meetings, at any time other than that. And in this case, this was driven around the redevelopment of a significant parcel of land known as the former UMass Lowell West Campus on 255 Princeton Street. And the property owner representative, because they're really the agent, they not own the property, but they're the proposed developer. They've been working for months upon months with the planning board and other town officials to advance the project. Originally thought would be perhaps at fall, maybe November, because back in the spring it was clear they couldn't quite make the cut for the fall town meeting because the warrant for the fall town meeting gets signed usually the Monday after Labor Day. Mm-hmm. So there was thought that maybe they'd come in late November, and then as it continued to unfold, it really was seen as, okay, let's push past the holidays into February. And sort of the question is, well, why not call all the way out to April well, at this point, the process is complete in terms of their permitting review under the proposed zoning bylaw by the planning board. And it's deemed of such significance that it would take a night of its own. Mm-hmm. And so the feeling is that the COVID pandemics seem to be allowing town meetings to take place at this point, so we'll proceed, on February 24th, and it will be a night of consideration, mm-hmm. primarily devoted to that parcel. So,
okay, so that's a very good explanation. So essentially, when things come up that may require rather swift action as opposed to waiting for a scheduled town meeting, it's appropriate to call a special.
Yeah, the most recent one I believe was the summer of 2020 when we called the special town meeting to acquire the Warren.
The Warren poll, yes, I remember that.
And again, it was of such significance, and again, time is always of the essence.
That timing was critical, as I recall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so again, we called a special meeting, provided notice. And it was good. Because one of the things that does happen in spring, and you've seen it as a veteran town meeting representative, is after about 3 or 4 sessions, the attendance starts waning.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes.
In the spring. So if you're now tacking on another night, it really does sort of wear people out. So here you come in February, a one-off. I think the most unique about this is the town meeting is going to on a Thursday night. Traditionally, our town meetings begin on a Monday night.
Yes.
There's a legal holiday that week.
Yes.
And the other reason for doing it was COVID related. Because of the concerns of COVID, we sought a venue that was larger, as we have in the past, mm-hmm. than the senior center. And the high school gym is available school vacation week.
Right.
And so that's why we chose the 24th. Again, with there being no school that week, it provides ample time for telemedia and others facilities to mm-hmm. set up the facility for expected to be one night.
So I guess the bottom line is the takeaway here is that we understand that a lot of thought has gone into this process as to the timing and the location and so forth, especially with respect to COVID. So, and I think that is a good solution. So the warrant gets posted. So what does that mean? We hear about constables and notifications. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Under the provisions of the charter and state law, the select board has the authority to call town meetings, but in order to provide notice and a warrant, which really the word warrant arrives from warning, mm-hmm. it's basically to notify people that the town's going to take action. So the detailed items are on the warrant. The select board signs it, and then we convey it to the constable whose job it is to post the meeting, i.e., and the town charter has specified places around town mm-hmm. where we, have to provide public notice. And generally, they're fire stations and places.
So
of public
an actual hard copy document has to be
Yep.
tacked up someplace, like the
Exactly.
fire station.
Yep.
And you can't get away with that requirement simply by putting it up on the town website.
Exactly.
Right.
But we do put it on the town
Oh,
website
sure.
in today's world.
Absolutely,
But,
yeah.
but it's a physical act of going out there and posting a notice. So there's one at the town offices and other locations where people can come in and say, okay, this, again, to make public notice and
Right.
awareness.
So that's a relic of the last century, folks, but for old relics like me, it's probably a good relic. Okay? Well, that's good. That's a good explanation. So why don't we get into actually the meat of the discussion here, which is what actually is on the warrant. And the first article, Article 1, is a land acquisition article. So
Yeah, it has to do with an easement. And again, what happens is once the town meeting is called, we sort of look out and say, gee, are there other things that we can expedite because of importance? And this is an example of that. Article 1 is an easement off of Ledge Road. And this is seeking the right to go onto private property by an easement for a bus turnaround. Many have been aware that the quarry operations have increased on Ledge Road. And in an interest of providing safety for the students who live on Ledge Road, the idea would be, rather than having them walking on a roadway that has commercial trucks hauling, crushed stone with no sidewalks in a rather country road, that the alternative is to allow a school bus to travel up Ledge Road, have a turnaround on right near Esther Drive, or at Esther Drive as it's known, which is really a fancy name for a driveway. It serves 3 parcels, almost like a common drive you'd see it as. And so we've originally had gone to town meeting on this a year ago, and further up Ledge Road. And ironically, the way it transpired was the property owner of that parcel where the town voted the easement at town meeting is the same owner of a property on Esther Drive. And I think in essence of goodwill, it was decided the Esther Drive one would be less intrusive. So we come back to get the revised or new location for the easement on Esther Drive. What this entails for the town is we will go in and surface the driveway, for lack of a better word, and be responsible for maintenance and snow and ice removal. In exchange, the resident gets that benefit, but they allow the school buses to get out.
the resident retains ownership of the land.
Exactly. And then if the town were ever to abandon the use, then the use would return, the easement would dissolve, go back to the owner. So this is timely. Why is it timely? Because the sooner we get this roadway bus turnaround paved, the better. So the idea would be, if we were to wait till April town meeting, which is really the end of April, you really wouldn't have it for any portion of the school year.
Miss the school year, right?
The hope would be if we can get it approved in February, when the weather breaks, if we get an early spring or sometime in spring, we can get out there and maybe they're going to have the bus rolling there in May and June. It's basically trying to do a good faith effort because, every day that somebody's, more safe is a benefit.
Well, that's it. You don't want to delay
Exactly.
progress on any kind of a safety issue.
Exactly.
So I think that makes perfect sense.
That's the issue with Ledge Road. There's no exchange of funding. The town's not making any payment for the easement other than the cost incurred for resurfacing the roadway and snow and ice removal in the future. So.
That's good. Article 2 is another land situation.
It's a land parcel. This is one where the treasurer, collector, finance director, John Souza, is occasionally approached by residents who have these orphan parcels, for lack of a better word. In this case, it's a parcel without road frontage. And it was acquired by the town, over 30 years ago by a tax possession, meaning the property, in this case, the owner wants to avoid this because what you can do if you no longer want to hold your property, stop paying taxes.
That's a tactic, right?
But that's a cumbersome process because one is you get all these notices saying you're going to be foreclosed upon, and then they put your name in the paper for being a tax delinquent, and then they eventually take it. And it usually takes a couple of years. On the town side, the cost of doing that is significant. You've got the notice cost, you've got the legal cost, you've got the land court cost, and the advertisement cost. So instead, here's a case where there's this 0.04 acre parcel up in North Chelmsford off of Needham Street in the area, by the lake. And the owner is basically saying, I no longer want this, even though the tax is de minimis, It's just, there's no value. Why the town is interested in this case is, one, it helps us to avoid the foreclosure costs, but also we happen to own a vacant parcel adjacent to it that was acquired by similar means years back. So the thought would be that the town's not going to get any tax revenue out of it anyway, because if they're not paying the taxes, and also we're avoiding the foreclosure costs, and at some future date, there's an interest by an abutting property owner, which would be the only one who would have value.
Right.
And we can go to the town meeting, get the authorization to sell, and then conduct an auction to sell the property.
Yeah.
So again, this isn't as time sensitive, but on the other hand, it just moves things along.
Yeah, as long as you've got the meeting in place anyway.
Exactly, and
Right.
it'll take all of about
Right.
2 minutes to explain it and cover it.
One can only hope.
Well, we would hope, yeah.
We find, my experience on some of these land issues is that
Yeah.
whenever you get a zoning article or an acquisition warrant article like this, all of a sudden you've got 162 zoning and land use experts in your town meeting. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's usually what happens.
Exactly.
So, Article 3. Maybe I should put my glasses on.
Collective bargaining.
Okay, that's the collective bargaining one.
Yeah, we actually have reached an agreement with the Public Safety Dispatchers Union, and so the state law provides that we have to bring it to the next town meeting for ratification. In this case, the agreement runs from July 1st, 2019, which is basically 2.5 years ago, through 5 months from now, which would be June 30th, 2022. So basically, it covers that 3-year period. The adjustment to the pay scales, quite simply, is 2% per year over the 3-year period. The only wrinkle in the formula is we're funding it 0-4-2 as opposed to 2-2-2. You say, well, why are you doing that? It's not to throw curveballs or anything else, but there's a provision in state law that the town can only fund labor contracts for the current fiscal year or the prior fiscal year. Well, given that this goes back beyond the prior fiscal year, there's 2 approaches the town could have taken. One is, well, sorry, we can't pay you anything, which would be a very harsh, cold approach. The other would be recognizing that we'll do 0-4 as opposed to 2-2, and then 2%.
So you front load it on the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the only people who would receive payment under that would be anybody who's employed beyond July 1st of 2020, because that's as far back as we can reach, the prior fiscal year. So therefore, somebody who would have left in that first year of the contract will get no compensation.
Right. That's the downside.
That's the downside, but it's unavoidable.
Right.
And so in this case, we provide it, and also, if you think of the math, I mean, I talked about the pay scales being 2-2-2 versus
I know that was quite a
0-4-2.
topic a couple of weeks ago at the select board
Yeah.
meeting. They wanted to get into the weeds of how you
Right.
did the calculation.
And the reason for that is that, yeah, if you do 0-4-2, well, yeah, the second year, everybody's made whole for the 2-2, but you didn't get anything in the first year for that first 2%. So what we do there is we've approximated what they would have earned, and it's roughly $1,500. So everybody will get a one-time payment of $1,500, which would have reflected that 2% they would have earned in the first year. The second year of the contract, they get paid what their pay scale would have been in either scenario.
Right.
It's 2% plus 2% is, even though compounding would be slightly.
Well, you have to take
really
that into
zero-
account.
It's really zero,
Yeah,
it's the
right.
equivalent of 0 and 4. So that second year, so what the town accountant does is she looks at the employees and takes them by fiscal year and says, okay, what did they earn in that year? And then you take that pay scale for the second year and then the third year. Well, if the first year was ineligible, and then you do the calculation for the second and third year, that stays constant. The second and third year stays constant because the pay scale is going 2% per year. But you really needed to address, well, they didn't get anything the first year.
Right.
Hence the $1,500.
Right.
So anyway, so that's what happens there and what that does is that brings them coterminous now with all of the other collective bargaining units, with the exception of the police superior officers, i.e. sergeants, which are still outstanding.
Now, we have a situation in town where all of the contracts expire at the same time. Is that true?
Yes,
or-
that's true.
Okay,
Yeah.
but
Virtually all. I mean, there's one on the school side.
that wasn't true,
Yeah.
if I recall, years ago.
Yeah.
Is that something that you,
We've been doing that, well, at least since I've been here, which is 15 years. And the reason for that is, and you can appreciate it now, you're in such economic volatility right
Yes.
now where you're better off all being in the same ship, because you could have a scenario where, here we just had a year with, 7% inflation. Well, if you were there a year ago, nobody foresaw that.
Oh, it's definitely the way to go. I mean, I
The
think,
big
yeah.
question is now going forward, what is
Right.
it? So if you have terms that are overlapping, it can present a hazard, for lack of a better word, for by randomness of where you fall, because it's like being if you're ahead of the wave, you may have been okay, depending on which way the tide is going. So in essence, we've held it coterminous at this point. Whether we'll seek additional 3-year agreements going forward, and that will be the effort. And so, in essence, it's really a question of parity and fairness.
Right, right. No, I think it's definitely the way to go. I'm glad that.
It also avoids you just being continuously at the bargaining table.
Well, that's it, right.
Because it just that gets to be tiresome, quite frankly, for all sides. And much like budgeting, you just don't want to be dealing with budgets for 12 months out of the year either.
Right, right.
So that's the reasoning there.
Well, let's hope that one goes smoothly. I think it probably will. Now, the Article 4 is regarding the ice rink, the forum.
Yeah, and this is another timely one that there's a reason for bringing it now as opposed to April with the rest of it. This is seeking to replace the refrigeration system at the Chelmsford Forum. And the reason we're seeking to do it now is you really want to do this work when the ice rink season ends, and hopefully not delay too much at the beginning of the fall season. Generally, the Forum and other ice rinks in New England, for the most part, shut down in April and then resume in October. In this case, we want to secure the funding at this point in time for a new refrigeration system, and then be able to bid it and award it and have the work performed as soon as possible in April once the season ends. Had we gone to town meeting at the end of April, that process we wouldn't be starting work out there until July.
Yeah, right.
And therefore, it's you don't want to be losing your season because it's irreplaceable or you're out.
Now,
And why this mattered was the system that was there was installed in 1985.
So it's the original.
Well, no, the facility was built in 65.
That's right, right.
Facility was built in 65. The ice rink
Bad
refrigeration
enough, that's
system
37 years
was
old.
85.
Yeah.
And we've been in the process of planning the replacement of this. And you may recall, we went to town meeting back in the fall looking for approval to put solar panels on the
Yes.
on the roof of the forum. And we did the senior center. In fact, the senior center is installed and operational. The problem with the forum was because it was built in 65, it doesn't have the load-bearing capacity for snow load and
Right.
solar panels. And given what we just had for snow, that is a
Yes.
reality. So we're in the process of looking at ground-mounted and coming back, and we will come back, we believe, for ground mounting. But in the meantime, the forum suffered a mechanical breakdown in the control system when they lost power. They had a situation where they lost 2 out of the 3 phases of power, and that damaged the control panel for the system at the forum, as well as one of the 2 compressors that turbocharge and run the rink system. That had us down for a week. And fortunately, after a couple of days, we were able to find someone who had the equipment that could service a 1985 control panel.
And the knowledge.
System. And the knowledge. And fortunately, because it's a small world amongst ice rink operators, that person does exist, and we brought him in, and therefore we were only lost a week. And why you say, well, Paul, it was only a couple of days, why was it a week? Well, because at that time it was actually a warm period in December, and we lost the ice surface, and it takes you about 4 days to build the ice surface. So we got that restored, and we were like, time is of the essence. We don't want to have a catastrophic failure, because if that's the case, then you're out of business, and then you're renting a temporary refrigeration system, like a modular one, which is very expensive to lease and to operate, because that you'd be running on diesel fuel and paying
At
$10,000 a
36,
month.
37 years, I'm going to say that is beyond its useful life.
So basically, this sort of accelerated what would have been the process, probably by a year. But so we're going for that. It's $1.53 million. That'll be borrowed over probably a 15-year period, so it'll be approximately $100,000 per year. And again, it gets absorbed into the debt system and so forth. So. So that's much needed and much timely. And those systems are a bit sophisticated in terms of their operations, but also they contain ammonia. So they're also a hazardous condition.
Right.
So again, when this thing crashed, we immediately shut down the facility because you can't take chances
Nope.
with ammonia gas or anything that's imperiling either the operators or the users of the facility. So again, discretion is the better part of valor in this case, and let's get this taken care of.
Yeah, and again, I think, the need for that is largely self-evident, so I really don't see too much controversy on that. But speaking of controversy, now we come to Article 5 here, which may generate a little discussion at town meeting.
Yeah, and this is the purpose of the meeting, and that's why it's at the end.
Right.
Because we expect, as you said, we would get through the first 4 articles rather swiftly, and then leave the bulk of the evening in the debate and consideration for the rezoning of the former UMass West Campus at 255 Princeton Street, and the associated article, which is Article 6, which is the affordable housing funding for that site.
So you can talk about those together.
But I'll start on the zoning. What this is a zoning article. An overlay, or basically as the name suggests, basically we're not changing the underlying single-family residential zoning, but this is an overlay that allows for multifamily units to be constructed. It's a 30-acre parcel, so it's a parcel of significance. The site today, if you go out there, is cleared. The university divested itself of the site, going back now 4 or 5 years ago. The town had no use, so we didn't apply to acquire the site because at the time, the university wasn't giving it away.
Nope.
And there was really no identified municipal use for that site, even in a cleared status. The terrain of the site doesn't lend itself to any beneficial use for the community. So at that point, they went out to public auction, and it was held at the town offices, a few years back, and it sold for over $3 million. And then that party then had to go through and remove and remediate the buildings that were there, all of which have been razed because they had been dilapidated, but they did contain hazardous materials. So our guess is there's probably over $5 million invested into that site.
I would say that's
without exaggeration. Right. So now the question becomes, what becomes of a $5 million site of 30 acres, which is one of the few developable pieces of that, in Chelmsford, moving forward. This is the second developer we've seen who wants to put multifamily units in because that's the market. Housing costs, as we know, are incredible.
You are not going to put 22 single-family units on that property.
No, and the reason for that is
it's not going to happen.
And the reason for that is that when you look at the investment return and the infrastructure costs, it's not just building 22 single-family homes, it's building the infrastructure to service 22 single-family homes, which means, roadways, utility lines, and so forth. And so recognizing that, the approaches on this site have been for multifamily housing. In this case, it's roughly 400 units. And the original proposal by a different developer was around the same size. And so the town's choice is, you proceed with this development by making the zoning change, and there's a development agreement that's been negotiated with the select board that sort of dictates what would happen under the zoning, or you say no, and as you say, if it's not viable for the zoning change, and it's not viable for single-family homes, something is going to go there.
And it'll be a hostile 40B.
Well, but even if it isn't a hostile 40B, there are other exempt uses under zoning as well.
That's true.
And that became the other issue is, well, what else could go there? Well, there are religious uses that are allowed. There's institutional uses that are allowed under zoning.
But it's 30 acres.
It's 30 acres.
Right.
And that's the key thing.
Right.
And so what's happened here, and I say it's very impressive how the developer went out and really did their due diligence and took the time and met with the abutters.
I've been in town 42 years, and I think I've said this publicly a couple times. I've never seen anything like it, and I have never seen a situation where the abutters are pretty much, they seem to be on board with it.
By and large, yeah.
I'm sure there's a few
it's
that...
never unanimous. But,
exactly.
Particularly Meadowwood and Augusta Way
and you have to credit the Trammell Crow for actually doing their due diligence and actually talking and listening.
And mitigating the project for the visual impacts, and they put
a lot of
fencing
changes
around.
have been made, and they put a lot of money in. So, One of the things that's really interesting about this project is they're going to have to do their own waste disposal.
On site.
On site.
And that's regulated by the state. And that's not unique to Chelmsford. I mean, there are a lot of communities, Westford and what have you, who do not have municipal sewer. So it's an on-site wastewater treatment facility, which is manned and operated 24 hours a day. And at this point, it's not new technology. I mean, this exists, and that's how it will work. And quite frankly, I don't think that's been a major concern, because it's just like people have private wells, you also have private septic in this case.
But to your point, it is highly regulated, and the oversight is there. So, I mean, it's not a situation where they can build and then somebody walks away and people are holding the bag.
And also, you've got it's a rental development.
Exactly.
So it's not as though it's a condo thing and somebody's holding the bag. The person who owns the rental property is responsible for the septic. So there's clearly a stakeholder interest.
Correct.
In running the septic.
So I think, 54 of those units are going to be choice units?
Right. There'll be units that.
What does that mean?
Basically, David Hedison, the Housing Authority, or their nonprofit affiliate Choice, as they're known, have worked with the developer to carve out a small portion of the property that they'll build 54 elderly senior affordable units on the site. In fact, they were also asking for the town to contribute $1.235 million towards that development. And then David will leverage the town's contribution to get tens of millions of costs to build those units, which again are permanently restricted for seniors.
That would come from community preservation?
It comes from community preservation and the Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund, which is from previous affordable housing developments where the applicant had a choice of either building the affordable units or making a cash contribution. Right. So in this case, what that does, going back to your 40B concern, is that then puts the town above the 40B 10% threshold for the next decade.
Because all the units count.
Because all the 54 units
Right.
count. So basically, between now and the year 2032, the town would not have the threat of an unfriendly, predatory affordable housing development that it did not wish to approve.
So if we didn't do that, and I know that we're still operating off the previous census, but the new figures seem to indicate that we would be below the 10%?
Yeah, we're about 40 some odd units by
Okay.
the new housing units. They haven't been finalized because the state has to identify year-round units versus housing units, and they haven't completed that exercise, even though in Chelmsford that's not a material number. So that's why we know
Right,
it's about 40
right.
units. But yeah, that's where we are, because we were over 10% from the last census.
Right.
We dipped slightly below, but with these 54 units, we're at 10% for the next decade.
And that gives us a nice safe harbor. Right.
For 10 years,
Right,
which
right.
means then you control your destiny.
Exactly.
For the next 10 years, and you're not subject to the unfriendly developments, which we know have. You served on that.
I certainly know about it.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
When I arrived, Hillside Gardens was
Oh
that
yes,
unit.
that was the hot button at the time.
That was the hot button. It only took 2 years of the select board's time.
Well, we
Yeah.
dragged that out about as long as we could.
So this allows the town to control its destiny.
Right.
And provide senior housing units, which are also needed. It's not just the 40B. There's a need for.
I think there's a crushing need in Chelmsford.
Right.
Really, there is. And as somebody who is now in his mid-70s, I'm kind of concerned about that. I mean, what do you do for people who lived here for 40 or 50 years, or maybe even their whole lives, and now they need to get rid of their $700,000-800,000 home, but they want to stay in town.
They want to stay in the community because
Right.
that's where their network is.
Exactly.
It's familiar. I mean, my mom stays in town. She knows her neighbors.
Yes.
She knows where the pharmacy is. People, they like.
I remember Paul Hart moved down to Florida. He was there 15 years, and he came back. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I missed the place."
Yeah.
So there you are,
Yeah.
So that's, there's a definite need for that. So I think this project really represents the best of many worlds. And not everybody's going to be happy with it, but you really have to think, when you're considering this zoning, you really have to stop and think there are other uses that could be more detrimental overall to the town. So we're out of time.
Right.
Like you said, it goes
quickly.
We got all the articles in, and you can watch this show. You can go back on the government channel, and Paul's got the same presentation on the government channel. So we're trying to get the information out, and we'll have you back soon to talk about other things.
Thank you.